I want Bitcoin to be really good money, but I don't really care if people find other uses for the protocol if they're useful, because I think if it's useful, it'll stick around. I don't think ordinals, the future of ordinals is JPEGs. I think it's something else. I'm not sure what. And therefore, if this network can do more than money and do other things, then great. We should embrace that.
Yeah, I think you got to look. I try to look out 30 years, and when I look out 30 years, I think, well, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of corporations that are going to build something on top of Bitcoin, and there's going to be endless generations and evolutions of layer 2 protocols. There'll be Lightning, the next version of Lightning. There may be a competitor to Lightning called Thunder, right? There'll be all sorts of open protocols. There'll be a market debate over that. There's going to be lots of people using Bitcoin in lots of different ways. And my view on this entire debate is, I'm an Austrian economist. So if all value is subjective, and the marketplace is continually generating ideas faster than we can conceive them, then we should just let the free market function, and it's going to generate all sorts of ideas, and 99% of them are going to fail. And so there's a 99% probability that some new idea that someone came up with is not a good one and it's going to fail. But if you're an Austrian economist and you believe in freedom, you can be free to not invest in that business idea, but you should just let all the businesses get launched and wait and see what happens. Bitcoin, I think of Bitcoin as scarcity, and I think of types of scarcity. First order scarcity is 21 million Bitcoin. There'll never be more than that. There'll be lots of people that will buy Bitcoin that you will not agree with. And there'll be lots of uses of Bitcoin you will not agree with. And there'll be governments that love it. You will not agree with it. And they call it money for enemies, right? So I don't criticize whoever for buying the Bitcoin. There were people that didn't want MicroStrategy to buy Bitcoin.
Yep.
You remember that's bad for Bitcoin. Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is 30, 40 years from now, if Bitcoin's the solution to everything, everybody owns Bitcoin. So it's just a question of the order. So, but the critical thing is, don't increase the number of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
21 million is the critical thing. The second order scarcity is the bandwidth of the transaction bandwidth, the block size. And right now, post SegWit, we're at the 4 megabyte blocks, and the purists would say we probably should have stuck with 1 megabyte, but I wasn't here then, and maybe I wouldn't have been that smart then. Maybe I wouldn't have been a purist. Maybe I had to go through it to think it. But it is what it is, right? And today, I don't think the exact number matters, whether it's 1, 2, or 4. I think what's critical is that it not change. When you're you remember we talked about plasticity, neuroplasticity, and when you're young, in your youth, you can take a lot of knocks and you'll recover. You get more fragile as you get older. And so Bitcoin in its youth went through a few distortions, not nearly so many as the other cryptos, which is why it's Bitcoin and why it succeeded. But there's a point when you fill your niche and you just can't radically change anymore without killing yourself. And so the commonly understood reason for why you don't want to change the block size is we don't want to centralize the network. We want to keep nodes that you can run. But it's not actually, in my opinion, it's not the best argument, right? I mean, the truth is you could probably make an argument that an 8 megabyte block space will also be decentralized or not. Now we're in this little debate over the cost of storage versus the rate at which the Bitcoin blockchain increments. The better debate is don't change it because it's unethical to change it. Don't change it because it's evil. It's unethical. That's why you don't do it. Why? Because every time you change the block space, you defraud or you deprive the Bitcoin miners of revenue. So if you actually keep doubling the blocks size, you keep driving transaction fees down. And so you're meddling in the economics of someone that in good faith invested in Bitcoin. If I invested all of my life savings in Bitcoin mining on the assumption that the blocks would remain constant and the Bitcoin would remain constant, and then some developer came up with a really good reason why we ought to, increase the Bitcoin, give some of it to the developers, and then triple the block size so that transaction fees at Binance won't be as expensive, I would be furious, right? But more than furious, right? Yeah, you have stolen their property in the same way that the Nazis stole the Jews' property. You've stolen it in the same way that every authoritarian has stolen property for the past 10,000 years, right? The history of humanity is full of powerful people that change the rules so that they can steal your land, so they can claim it via eminent domain, so they can tax it away. They pass a law making it illegal for you to bake bread. It's illegal for you to ship. It's illegal to cross the river from New Jersey to New York. These are all just different unfair rules. So changing the transaction bandwidth fundamentally is an unprincipled decision because you deprive people in the ecosystem of their property rights. And it's to the benefit of someone, to the detriment of someone else, and you basically retroactively, change the rules, right?
100% right. In that, I understand changing the 21 million. That is essentially theft, in that you are debasing the Bitcoin for everyone else. But for a long time, we've been doing this. I've heard many people say, look, there may come a time in the future where we will need to increase the block size because Bitcoin is so popular. It's become prohibitively costly to use.
Doubling the block size is theft too. Doing anything to interfere with the scarcity of the first derivative of scarcity is transaction bandwidth, right? So obviously, if you double the amount of Bitcoin and gave it all to yourself, that's obvious theft. People can figure it out. But if you double the transaction bandwidth such that you drive the transaction fees from 25 billion a year to 25 million a year, you've stolen hundreds of billions of dollars from somebody, right? The actual free market in transactions is sensitive to the bandwidth. And so tinkering with it in an artificial way, and it is artificial when you change the code, means you are directly depriving all of the miners of their revenue. Assuming that transactions remain constant. Well, in any scenario, increasing the amount of bandwidth drives down the transaction fees.
So
right?
But I guess the point
regardless of what you assume, right? You can have any assumption about transaction demand for the next 100 years. But if you double or triple or whatever the bandwidth for transactions, you drive the fees down by some substantial portion. And that means you probably take Bitcoin miners that might be profitable, make them unprofitable. And you take a lot of businesses that would be in business and you drive them out of business. And of course, most horrific is anyone that's a theoretician looks at it and says, that was an attack on Bitcoin because you've corrupted the protocol. Therefore, I don't trust the network anymore, which means the next $100 trillion doesn't go on the network.
So do you think, was SegWit theft then? The upgrade the upgrade to SegWit, where block space went up from essentially 1 to 4 megabytes, the increased block space we got.
Is
that a theft?
It was an ethical quandary, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a war. And both, it was a war, and the way to justify it would be it was a war, and we thought this was the least worst option because the other side was going to do something worse. Yeah. But I don't think there are good guys in a war.
Yeah.
Like if you look all around the world and study the history of politics, it seems like the winners are just the least worst governments. They're all bad. There's no good.
was like Trump's answer the other day when they tried to corner him and made him choose who he wanted to win the war, and he wouldn't pick, and he said, "I just want it to end."
But like the slight change. The truth is, SegWit undermined transaction fees, to a certain degree. I mean, it changed the contract with the miners after the fact, and then Taproot changes it again. And these are very risky things because they change all the economics and the economic incentives and the densities. And you could argue they were done either for expedient purposes or for functionality. And it's right. It's true, right? There's a lot more functionality post Taproot, and there's a bit more. There's a lot of functionality that you couldn't implement without SegWit, right? Right, and but yeah, right. The fundamental things we're staring at right now, like Lightning and like inscriptions, benefited and maybe were essential. You almost needed SegWit and Taproot to get there, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very scary history, right? The 14-year history of Bitcoin is very scary, but we've arrived at this place right now where it's pretty clear that there's extraordinary functionality that you can implement. You're staring at it with all these inscriptions, and it's pretty clear that you can do extraordinary things with Lightning. And it seems to me there's no reason why you can't go from 500 billion to 5 trillion to 50 trillion. And I'm not even sure we can't go to 250 trillion based upon the current functionality I see. If the base layer can't do something, then the question is, can the layer 2 do it? And if the layer 2 can't do it, if you wanted to achieve it, you would have to do it with layer 3. And you can make an argument, right? You can make an argument that if SegWit and Taproot had never happened, yeah, you wouldn't be doing this stuff in the layer 2 protocols, but layer 3s, the money might have been harder. And maybe the layer 3s would have come along, and people like Apple and Google would have embraced Bitcoin, or would be embracing Bitcoin, or some other company or bank would embrace Bitcoin, and they would just fill the gap. There's trade-offs everywhere. But having said that, just to be clear, I'm not going to second guess history.
Mm-hmm.
I would say war is hell. Bitcoin was a very unlikely creation. It was very unlikely to survive. So many other versions didn't survive. When it got to the block size wars, it was a bitter civil war, and there were probably what would be the word? Misunderstood decisions made on both sides, and there were probably there was very poor logic in lots of places, or maybe logic that would be easy to criticize today. But I do think Bitcoin's better. Bitcoin is better for SegWit. It's better for Taproot. They are stable. If they had blown the network up, right,
Mm-hmm.
then I wouldn't be saying that. We wouldn't be here. But now, once you've achieved a miracle, like you've started a nuclear furnace, or you've started a star, right? You've achieved a miracle. Once you've achieved the miracle, don't look the gift horse in the mouth, right? Don't let the fire go out. And I think you have to shift your view from being aggressive. I think they when there's Bitcoin Cash and there was a lot of other forks, they thought that the main chain might die. I mean, they literally were fighting for the survival of Bitcoin. I don't think we're fighting for the survival of Bitcoin with the next cool idea that comes along in the year 2024. I do think right now, I think it's very important right now that we have a stable network that people can build upon. And I think that stability means it needs to be stable economically. And that means you got to cap the number of Bitcoin, but you got to cap the bandwidth, right? Because otherwise it's not stable economically. Remember, we talked about adiabatic lapse, or a hole in the fuselage. If you don't cap the bandwidth, then there won't be a healthy transaction fee market. And if there isn't a healthy transaction fee market, then you're eventually going to see all your miners go bankrupt and go to zero. And then you open up this Pandora's box of discussing putting in an inflation supply to feed, to support the miners. And that's an awful place to be. So it needs to be economically sound to be successful. It needs to be technically sound. And you're a lot more likely to be technically sound if you stop changing things. Right? I mean, if you live long enough, you find that most software becomes a Rube Goldberg device. There's too much code, and every piece of code's got more bugs, and eventually you're carrying so much technical debt you can't maintain it. And so we don't want it to be one iota more complicated than it needs to be. And then it needs to be ethically sound. Okay, and the root cause of all unethical behavior is someone that thinks that they can work the political process or weaponize the political process in order to distort economics to their benefit. So, for example, who's winning if we censor inscriptions? Well, I mean, Binance would be winning. Binance wouldn't actually have to install Lightning. They wouldn't have to implement Lightning. Coinbase doesn't have to implement Lightning if you just artificially keep all the transactions that are not pure monetary transactions off the network. So the exchanges that don't embrace Lightning are winning. Lightning is losing. Companies that implement good Lightning implementations, good channels with good functionality, they're winning from this inscription brouhaha. They would be losing if people were doing a lot more transactions cheaper on the base layer. Companies that want to launch layer 2, especially layer 3 apps that move Bitcoin at the speed of light on a layer 3, they're losing if people are using the layer 1. And of course, but those are all second order changes, because everything you do, it affects, there's a positive, there's a negative, someone's winning, someone's losing. People that don't offer Lightning in general are going to suffer if the transactions go up. But let's talk about miners. Miners are the line of first defense for Bitcoin. And a lot of people don't understand just how profound and important they are. One thing they do is they throw up a 350 exahash wall, and that's they're digital power centers. And you're going to want as much digital power as possible. And you want to stay ahead of Google and Amazon and the worldwide compute power if you're going to stay secure. So we need them to spend billions and billions of dollars a year on that. The second thing that they're doing, in addition to just defending that, they're creating a censorship-resistant messaging network, because if the miners are spread all around the world and they're that powerful, then you can't physically stop the transaction. So that's really important. But the second thing they're doing is the miners are the ones that are going to actually be lobbying the politicians to not outlaw Bitcoin in every country. So when a country comes along and they attack Bitcoin, the first thing they attack is the miners. And the miners suffer, like in Sweden when there's a massive tax on electricity, or if this White House proposal comes to see any support at all, the miners are the first ones to suffer. The miners will all go bankrupt a decade, 10 to 30 years before the network dies, before Bitcoin dies. But think of the miners as your skin. If I flay it off you, right, you won't be immediately dead, but death will follow. And so you need the miners to be healthy for a bunch of reasons. They're your political defender. They're your physical thermodynamic defender or computational defender. They're also the financial defender of the network. Because if you look at one of the reasons why Bitcoin is more secure and more successful than every other crypto, there's like 20 or more publicly traded companies that are Bitcoin miners. So the miners actually went and they raised billions and billions of dollars of capital. And then they took themselves public, and you see the riots and the marathons and the Hut 8s of the world and the Irises of the world. Those corporate operators are then the ambassadors of the Bitcoin community to Wall Street, to the investment banks, every one of those companies has general counsels. They can all afford PR people. They can afford lobbyists. They create jobs. You know, when a crypto promoter or a guerrilla marketer for a crypto proof of stake network, when they actually funnel millions of dollars to a politician, kind of like what Sam Bankman-Fried did when he dumped the hundreds of millions of dollars on the politicians. When they funnel the money and then they whisper in their ear that Bitcoin is not environmentally friendly and that they should be banned, it's going to be the Bitcoin miners that are going to be on the front line fighting that battle. And they're going to be fighting that battle against everybody who comes up with a too good to be true proof of stake yo-yo coin that is going to print the coin, sell the coin, buy a bunch of politicians, buy a bunch of lawyers, buy a bunch of marketers, and they're going to spread all the anti-Bitcoin FUD. So if you don't have the miners, you don't have physical presence in the real world, and that means you're spinning off in the metaverse, you become virtual only, but you also don't have political presence. You're losing your political presence. You're losing your physical presence, you know, and that's you're losing your legal presence. It's so the biggest problem with either changing the block size or censoring the transactions is you're depriving the miners of a revenue stream. And Satoshi gave us this block reward as a subsidy to bootstrap the network, but by the year 2035, it's 99% done.